Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our webinar today. This is our first webinar as Cancer Nation. We're very excited to have an important topic today, and I want to thank you for joining us. And I'm really delighted to have Kirstin Nussgruber joining us today, who is a two-time breast cancer survivor and an expert in nutrition and integrative care and holistic health. And she works with cancer patients to help them with the complementary ways of making sure their treatments are effective and that they get through their treatment. I had the pleasure of going with Kirstin on some Hill visits this in at our CPAT symposium and Hill Day in June. And we're really grateful for your expertise today to talk about cancer diets and help us understand there's so many diets out there. There's so much information. It's really overwhelming for anyone. But when you add to that a cancer diagnosis and really trying to understand how to eat well during and after your cancer treatment to improve your health and reduce risks of recurrence, it's overwhelming. And in our state of survivorship survey over the years, we find that respondents talk about not having enough information about exercise and diet, nutrition, how they can best take care of themselves. They're grateful to have gotten through treatment, but then the question is, what next? What do I need to do to regain my health? And they don't always get the support they need. So we're really grateful, Kirstin, for your willingness to share your expertise with us today. And I am, before I turn it over to you, I just want to let everybody know we will her bio is in the chat, and I didn't want to waste too much time going through her bio, but please read it. It's very impressive. She has a lot of certifications and training. Also, we will send a recording of this webinar, including the slides, so you will have access to the slides. And I also just want to thank the Cancer Nation team for helping put this webinar together, and of course to all of our sponsors who make our work possible. Now I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Now let me go share my screen. Good. Are we good? Screen share good? All right.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. I'm sure you've got lots of questions just by looking at the title, and I hope I'm going to be answering all of them. My goal is to allow some time at the end for Q&A sessions as well. So let me dive right in. Ooh. Now, we tested this. There we go. Okay, that one works. Brief outline before I dive into the meaty parts of it. So I'm going to be focusing on what the research says. So just in generic, what nutrition research is out there, and then also in association with the diets that I'm going to be looking at today, which are plant-based diets, ketogenic and low carbohydrate diets, calorie restriction, and fasting. We want to share evidence-informed and evidence-based information, and that is really the gist of the whole research section, what is already being looked at. Then we go into, all right, practical things, macronutrients, what and when to eat. So we'll focus on carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and then I've got a host of practical tools and tips for you as well at the end. There you go. So before I start with the nutrition section, what we need to understand is that in the past, there's often been limited data. Why? Just because of the way research needs to unfold with randomized clinical trials. They're very costly, and who will fund them? Then there are so many factors that impact cancer development, and everyone is unique. Can you actually study that adequately? We also have issues with consistently measuring the food intake and quantifying dietary patterns. Everyone does things a little bit differently. How can you guarantee that everyone follows the exact same structure and habits? And then can you ever account for the bio-individuality? We are all so very different. You eat something, I eat something, and our bodies respond differently. So can you ever really account for that in research studies? And also we need to study what effect nutrition has on particular patients, not just the generic public. But there is a growing trend towards oncology nutrition research, and that is incredibly encouraging. So on a big scale, there is the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research. They come up with a continuous update project, and the latest one is from May 2018. So I'm hoping a new one will come up soon. And they really look at diet, nutrition, physical activity in cancer and the interactions between them. So that's always a good basis to go by. What is a bit more recent was ASCO, the American Society for Clinical Oncology. They actually had guidelines on reviewing cancer diets only 3 years ago. And they looked at whether diet and exercise affects outcomes related to quality of life, toxicity, and cancer control during treatment. So what I love about this, it's a systemic analysis, meaning they look at tons of research that is already out there. And they looked at data from the last 21 years. So it's a very extensive review here. And they looked at different dietary interventions. They looked at timing of food intake, aka fasting, right? They looked at the macronutrient composition, how many carbs, fats, proteins. And they also looked at which foods were included and which foods were left out. So it's a very, very comprehensive review. And the conclusions were this. So they said patient genetics, which are unique to patients, and the tumor genomics, meaning what genetic imprint does a tumor present with, which also is unique, they are increasingly directing therapies and will contribute to precision nutrition and exercise efforts in the oncology setting. So there is definitely this trend towards more precision, personalized approaches to this type of care, and that I find incredibly encouraging. They concluded that cancer is a teachable moment. I think all of us on the call here know that. We use our cancer diagnosis to find out more about ourselves and about how we can help ourselves. So that's nothing new to us. Other two areas of research, the National Institutes of Health, I put in there were prioritizing nutrition for precision health, at least up until this year. So I hope that will still be a focus for them. And then the National Cancer Institute in 23, they had exercise and nutrition interventions to improve cancer treatment-related outcomes. So when someone's going through treatment in cancer survivors, and they're looking at that, that's an ongoing study that include 4 trials focusing on ovarian cancer, rectum, colon, and breast. So the gist of this is things are happening on a big scale, and I'm very happy about that. But let's look at what we're here for. Let's look at comparing the plant-based diets, ketogenic and low-carbohydrate diets, and calorie restriction and fasting. And the reason I chose those is because generally questions I receive about nutrition will relate to any one of those 3. So I'm hoping I'm giving you a little glimpse into the oncology nutrition setting. This is like one slice of a bigger piece of pie, but at least it's something to direct our attention to. So are they just trendy, or is there evidence-based information that will actually improve treatment outcomes and survivorship? So I'm going to start with plant-based diets. It is a pattern of eating based on whole plant foods, right? Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, beans, nuts, and seeds, with very little to no animal-based products. There are 6 main types. They differ mainly by the amount of animal products that are included, and you are all familiar with this, I'm sure. I just wanted to frame this for us and just get us to focus on what do I mean when I talk about plant-based diets. So any of these are included, right? Vegan, vegetarianism, pescatarian, meaning it does include fish. Lacto-ovo means they do include eggs and dairy. Flexitarian is mostly plant-based, and then the whole food plant-based. And you'll see why I included the whole food plant-based just now. So quickly, again, what does the research say? So these are fairly recent analyses again, and meta-analyses, again, they will look at existing research and pool the information that we glean from them. So I personally prefer that because that's what I want to know. What's the summary of the latest research? And in this particular study, they looked at the risk related to colorectal cancer. So they made it specific to a particular cancer type. And basically the results were that regardless of the genetic predisposition, in other words, the individuality of the cancer patient, if you had a good quality plant-based diet, it showed it to be protective because there's lots of antioxidant and anti-inflammatory nutrients in it, okay? low quality and unhealthy plant-based foods, there is such a thing. They can be pro-inflammatory, and that often includes the refined grain foods such as white pasta, white bread, and heavily processed foods. They go under the heading of plant-based as well, but they're not necessarily healthy. And this particular study picked that out. And again, it's a new step in actually acknowledging that there are differences out there, and plant-based isn't just plant-based. Right? We need to look at the quality of the food we're consuming as well. The ketogenic diet, right? Here, did I jump the slide? Sorry. Oh no. Oh, can I go back? Oh, I can't go back. I can't go back. There we go. Yeah. Thought so. I thought I'd skipped a slide. There was another one in the plant-based diet. So again, research, this was a very recent review from this year of data from, these are hospital-based control studies, and they looked at various cancers, okay? So not just colorectal, but a couple. Can diets that emphasize plant-based foods and reduce but not eliminate animal foods favorably affect the risk? What they wanted to see also is, did these vegetarian studies account for high quality and low quality plant-based foods? And the results were really, their conclusions were, restrictive vegetarian diets may cause nutrient deficiencies and excess risk of metabolic and other chronic conditions. So we need to be very mindful of what we're eating in the vegetarian diets. And unhealthy plant foods contribute to problems that can cause cancer to potentially develop and progress, such as the higher glycemic load. I'm going to be talking about that later, what that means, what insulin resistance is, and increased IGF-1. I'm going to talk about all that a little bit later. Right now, I just want you to know that unhealthy plant foods can contribute to an environment that is conducive to cancer growth and development. And that's what this particular review showed. Ketogenic diets, I know on everybody's mind. Here to very brief overview of what they are. It's a high-fat, low-carbohydrate, moderate protein diet. Generally, the ratio is 3 to 4 times fat to 1 times protein and some non-starchy carbohydrates. So fats often constitute between 65 and 85% of the entire diet. It's a lot. Protein 20 to 25%, and carbohydrates only between 5 and 10% per day. That's very little. Okay, and fasting is part of the process. There are 5 types in medical literature, and they differ by the macronutrient ratios, meaning how many fats, proteins, or carbs they are. So there are variations within the ketogenic diet. And again, we need to take that into account when we think ketogenic diet. So there are differences there too. So when someone says to me, I'm following a ketogenic diet, the first question I say is, explain how much fat do you eat, how many proteins, how many carbohydrates are you actually consuming? And the goal with the ketogenic diet is to achieve ketosis. That is a different way in which the body produces and uses energy. It's a forced fat metabolism. You're using ketones as the primary energy source, and that shifts from glucose. So it's a very, very controlled an intervention in a metabolic process in the body. Here too, what does the research say? So the effects of the ketogenic diet on insulin sensitivity and weight loss in 23. So insulin sensitivity here too, what does that mean? Again, I'm going to go into in detail when we look at carbohydrates, because that answers your sugar question, I'm sure all of you have. But insulin sensitivity, we want our bodies to be sensitive to insulin. However, insulin itself can be a growth factor in cancer growth. So this particular review said that the ketogenic diet actually improves the insulin sensitivity. That's a good thing through its effect on fat and weight loss, because we're restricting carbohydrates, and that lowers blood glucose and insulin levels. Both of those are growth factors. So that's basically, we know that now. Okay, they've done enough studies, including human studies, that we can make that claim. Then I like this, feeds into what we're talking about. They compared a plant-based and ketogenic diets as diverging paths to address cancer. So they looked at both, okay? Despite a starkly different nutrient composition, a whole foods-based plant-based diet and a ketogenic diet, they can both be associated with weight loss, decreased inflammation, and decreased insulin levels. All those 3 factors are conducive to making your inner terrain not hospitable to cancer. The whole foods plant-based diet is associated with increased fiber, phytochemicals, which are good chemicals from plants, and other elements that help control the environment, decrease insulin-like growth factor, which is a cancer-promoting growth factor. That's anti-cancer. And the ketogenic diet, similarly, also affects certain signaling molecules in a positive way, anti-cancer. So another really promising area of study is when we are now looking at diets and specific treatments. And I'm very happy to report that here too, with specific targeted treatments, in this instance, they looked at the PI3K inhibitors. It's a type of targeted treatment. That treatment can cause increased insulin and increased glucose. So to counter effect that, right, so we need the treatment, which is our cancer treatment, but to counter the effect of increased glucose and insulin, a ketogenic diet can actually help make that treatment more effective and also prolong the time in which patients can receive that treatment. This too was a fun study. They looked at the ketogenic diet and cancer, so not just weight loss, but directly related to cancer, fad or fabulous. And here, the benefits of the ketogenic diet are now official, and unless stated, these are human study results, which is another big step in the right direction. Before, all the ketogenic diet research was based on animal studies. We now have human study results to report on, so yay. And basically, important part here, it deprives tumor cells with dysfunctional mitochondria of glucose. So mitochondria are little organelles in every single cell. We have tons of them in every cell. They produce energy. And if they are dysfunctional, this is an important caveat here. So they get the ketogenic diet does not allow them to be able to use glucose as fuel. Ketone bodies, which is what a ketogenic diet does. These are fat bodies. When we eat a ketogenic diet, we produce ketone bodies. They do a lot of good things. They influence cancer cell signaling and gene expression. They activate tumor suppressing cells, meaning those also genes that we have that suppress tumor signaling. They reduce inflammation and they create oxidative stress in cancer cells. This particular one was from my studies. So ketogenic diet also lowers inflammation. It improves if we have metabolic abnormalities. That means if we have high insulin, high glucose, weight, this can have a positive effect on these metabolic abnormalities, which leads to insulin resistance and diabetes type 2, which we know is a known factor for increased cancer risk. It also protects healthy cells from the damage from chemotherapy and radiation therapy. And that's also such a good positive contributor to this particular way of eating. And it decreases some side effects. I've mentioned that before, where we have increased glucose and insulin response to some targeted treatments. These little images that I threw in there just to lighten things up a little bit because we're talking about research. Those are acceptable sweeteners that do not raise your insulin or glucose levels. So move on. This is a table I've put in for you. I don't want to go through it in detail because it's meaty, but there are challenges with the ketogenic diet, and we need to be mindful of when not to follow a ketogenic diet, which again is a high-fat diet, right? So first of all, it's very difficult to implement, to try and stay in ketosis all the time. It requires quite some effort, right? We have certain pre-existing medical conditions where we say do not follow a ketogenic diet, and they are listed there. And these are important factors to consider. So I really discourage anybody from just delving into a ketogenic diet and thinking, I'm just going to try that as a nutrition approach. The ketogenic diet is a very therapeutic diet and needs to be done under clinical supervision because you need to be able to assess whether you are a good candidate for doing a ketogenic diet or not before you even embark on it. There are certain genetic mutations, if we have them and we can test for them in blood, but if we have them and we eat a high-fat diet, that's not a good idea. This particular one, ApoE4, you then increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease, right? So we kind of want to avoid that. Also certain genetic mutations in the actual tumor where fat can actually then fuel tumor growth. So we kind of want to know that before we embark on this as well. And of course, there's some certain nutritional risks associated with it. Often ketogenic diets consume high amounts of saturated fats, which I will talk on later when we get to fats. And you can have some nutrition deficiencies too. And especially bone health, it can reduce your bone mineral density too and risk of kidney stones. So we need to be mindful with the ketogenic diet. Now, low carbohydrates and carb restriction, what is that? So this is a pattern of eating where we're focusing on reducing the overall calorie intake from all carbohydrates. We avoid refined carbohydrates that don't have any fiber, the white carbohydrates, white pasta, white rice, anything white done with white flour. But we focus on complex fiber-rich carbohydrates. That's what that means, right? Complex carbohydrates means there's a lot of fiber, whole grains, whole fiber products, vegetables too. So here we talk about how do we classify these carbohydrates, the glycemic index and the glycemic load. So what does that mean, right? Glycemic index means that we rank a carbohydrate food by how quickly they raise blood glucose levels right after eating. And it compares the blood sugar response to a food with a response to when we eat pure glucose. If you would eat pure glucose, they gave that a GI of 100. And then they categorize each individual food into low, medium, and high glycemic index. So that can become pretty complicated, right? If you think about that, every single thing you eat, you think, how quickly does it raise my glucose level? So a better indicator is to look at the glycemic load, which means how much or how many carbohydrates am I actually consuming in a day and what quality are they? So we prefer to look at that whole load and just to get the bigger picture than just becoming too reductionist and just focusing on all individual foods, because that can drive anybody crazy, right? Me too. So with carb restriction, what does the research say? This particular study looked at stage 3 colon cancer patients who were following the American Cancer Society's nutrition and physical activities guidelines. So regimented approach, looking at are there better survival rates than those who do not follow those? And what they basically found was, first of all, those that had a high compliance, there was 85% of people that actually survived, and low compliance, not so much. There was a 9% reduction in risk of death. Sounds really, really morbid, but that's sometimes how the research is. They look at quality of life improvement, treatment efficacy, and rates of death as well. So that's just how things get rated here. Back to nutrition. So what seemed to matter the most was the amount of daily carbohydrate intake. In other words, the glycemic load. How many total carbohydrates did they eat during the day? And if that was less or equal to 100 grams a day, the survival rate was higher. And it was in particular noticeable if people had a BMI, a body mass index of 25 or greater. And that's where your age and your body weight gets calculated to understand where on the fat scale you lie. I don't use BMIs on its own because it doesn't tell me much. And I think they are very stringent in, how quickly they place you into the obese rate as well. I don't agree with them. But it is an indicator that is used in research. They looked at carbohydrate intake in breast cancer, and they revisited a study that was done a couple of years ago. What they wanted to understand is, does the carbohydrate intake affect the IGF-1 receptor expression? That is a switch that can switch on cancer cell growth, right? That gets fueled by this hormone that I'm going to be talking about just now. And they here found too, the important thing was there was a 50% reduced recurrence if participants just reduced their carbohydrate intake by only 27 grams a day. Okay, that's not a lot. If you look at bananas, one banana is about, depends on the size, but is about 30 grams of carbohydrates, by the way of which 15 grams of sugar. So it's a high sugar fruit, but just to give you a bit of an idea of what 27 means. Which was a really good response rate. All right. Good. Low carbohydrates versus low fat. That's a big question I get asked a lot of times as well. And What they did here, this was a 12-week study, a small group, only 40 participated, and you looked at a carbohydrate restricted diet versus a low-fat diet. And it depended, how did they determine this? By different ratios in terms of how many carbohydrates, proteins, and fats you actually ate. And the carbohydrate restricted ones, they consistently improved certain factors that are conducive to cancer growth. We call them metabolic syndrome factors. Increased glucose, increased insulin sensitivity, and the triglycerides, right? If they elevated, they all contribute to this metabolic syndrome. And we know that that is a known factor for lots of chronic diseases, but cancer is included. So here too, the lower carbohydrate outperformed the low fat people. Finally, the intermittent fasting has become very popular. Okay, this is a pattern of eating that involves abstaining from food for a certain period of time. And there are different versions here. So you can have alternate day fasting, which is pretty rigorous, right? You fast one day, you eat the next, fast, eat. So this is really something that should only be done by very healthy people because it does reduce nutrients to quite a degree. You have periodic fasting, you fast for 2 days, eat for 5 days. You have time-restricted feeding where you eat within a certain window, let's say an 8-hour window. That's the only time you eat, let's say from 10 a.m. in the morning until 7 p.m. at night. Only in that window you're eating. And then intermittent fasting is often easily done overnight, where you fast because you're sleeping anyway. So you stop eating after you have dinner and don't eat anything up until the next day. Dr. Walter Longo is really a very prominent figure in the whole fasting cancer area, and he's done a ton of research over the last 2 or 3 decades. And he's just brought out a new book, Fasting Cancer, and I encourage you to read it. It's very eye-opening. He also addresses different cancer types in that book as well, because that's what we need to do in research. We cannot just go cancer in general. We have to look at breast cancer and ovarian cancer and prostate cancer. We have to focus on the different cancer types because they represent themselves so differently in the body. And a quote from his book as well: we have learned that you cannot starve cancer with fasting alone. Since cancer steals from other cells and finds a way to stay alive, even if the patient fasts, you can use fasting mimicking diets to make the cancer cells so weak or desperate that the right therapy will kill them, right? So what he's saying is, so fasting and fasting mimicking diets can play a very important role in improving cancer treatment outcomes, right? In weakening cancer cells so they respond better to treatment. Because cancer cells can exploit various nutrients for growth, but they are especially vulnerable during fasting states. They react to fasting much stronger than healthy cells do, and we can use that to our advantage and pair that up with treatment. And healthy cells are protected, by the way, during fasting. So that's the biggest key, right? That the healthy cells are actually more protective against also the side effects of cancer treatments. So he came up with this term nutri-technology, and it's basically how do we achieve strong anti-cancer effects in combination with cancer drugs, treatments, to make them more effective and protect the patient, so the patient can withstand these treatments and have them for longer, especially if you're dealing with stage 4 cancer as a chronic disease. We know that very often we become cancer treatment resistant, so we want those treatments to last as long as possible. The amount of calories consumed, what the ingredients are, and how frequently we eat results in 2 things that are important here. Differential stress resistance means that normal cells, but not cancer cells, are protected from therapy. Very important, right? So how do we stay healthy while receiving treatment? And the differential stress sensitization means that we prime cancer cells to be affected by the therapy. We want to stress them, weaken them, so that they, when we receive therapy, it becomes more effective. Again, a table for you guys, main therapeutic effects of intermittent fasting. We have lots of really good stuff here to tell us that intermittent fasting, that was the fasting we can do overnight, which literally anyone can do, okay? Doesn't affect our nutrient profile. We can even do that while we're going through treatment. It's the easiest way of incorporating fasting. how important these factors are in helping us to make treatment more effective, protect healthy cells, and in what way. Okay, so this is something you can, somebody doubts you and says, I don't think that fasting really does a difference, you show them the slide. Okay. These are all my references for fasting, so lots of them. There's lots of studies out there now, which is really fantastic. There is latest research going on. Walter Longo is focusing on breast cancer, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and T-cell leukemia. And in all those, he's showing that this fasting mimicking diet plays a crucial role in reprogramming cancer cell metabolism. So it can affect how cancer cells show up and survive. Our standard treatments, standard conventional care treatments can become more effective, and we can reduce some of the side effects from treatment. Most of my clients do nightly fasting. I do that too because it is such an easy way to incorporate fasting. 13-hour fast. This particular study looked at breast cancer patients, and they went back to over 2,000 women from a study a while ago, but they looked at them again in a couple of years later. So the same people that were studied almost 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they looked at them again. And they basically said 13 hours or more, the minimum kind of 13 hours or more, reduced the overall risk of recurrence. And that's very encouraging. So I say a minimum of 13 hours, right? Here too, we need to be mindful that sometimes we cannot fast. Why? When we already have a lot of weight loss because of treatment. So we really need to assess every person whether they can fast or not. If we are over the age of 65, there's the risk of loss of muscle mass, sarcopenia. If we have high blood pressure, if we do have diabetes, we need to be very careful with fasting. We also need to understand that cancer cells can become sneaky and adapt. So there are some large mass tumors that have different mutations in them that can make them unresponsive to fasting. We've seen that in animal studies. And they can even adapt to ketones or other non-glucose energy sources. So we just need to be mindful that cancer can adapt. Okay. More research is needed to determine if cancer cells can protect themselves when we start fasting. We haven't seen that yet in the research literature, but they are working on that to try and answer that question for us. And of course, the question, is this effective with all cancer types? We know in those types that have been studied, we know, but we don't know everything, okay? So you're going to ask yourself what is left to eat, and I don't blame you. Let's look at that. So I want to bring us back to the basics, okay? Macronutrients in cancer. So macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And why are macronutrients important? Well, they provide us with calories and energy. They give us structural integrity to our tissues. They regulate hormone production, all those hormones that influence our blood sugar levels, our hunger, our stress response. They help regulate entire body systems, and they steer intracellular signaling pathways, all that information that's happening in our body. Macronutrients steer all of that. The way these macronutrients are distributed in our diet affects our hormonal status and cellular activity of tissues. So important is how much do we eat, right? How much of the carbs, proteins, and fats do we eat? Because that has a direct effect on promoting or reducing signaling pathways between cells that regulate division and cell death apoptosis. So how much we eat of what does matter. Carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, what do? They are our main energy providers. They regulate our blood glucose and insulin metabolism, right? I'm going to delve into that just now with the next slide. They also help break down cholesterol and triglycerides. So that is a lesser known fact, but they play an important role in that too. They help ferment bacteria in the colon, right? Which, we are full of microbes, good and bad. And in our colon, we need to have certain ones that ferment to get our waste product ready for elimination. We have the simple carbohydrates. They digest very rapidly and increase your blood glucose and insulin very fast. We want to avoid that. Those are the typical blood sugar spikes, right? If you have low blood sugar, you start to shake and you quickly scoff something down and you feel better. Generally, people grab very simple refined carbohydrate products because you have that quick effect of stopping the shakes. Okay. That is one area we focus on immediately. If somebody says, I have these blood sugar spikes, it means you're not eating in a consistent way where your blood glucose levels rise slowly. That's our goal. And complex carbohydrates do that. There's a slower digestion, gradual increase in blood glucose and insulin. That's what we want. And we want lots of fiber. Indigestible, complex carbs that support the good bacterial growth in our GI microbiome and help with the fermentation in the colon. That's what we need fiber for. Okay. Just basic biochemistry. Rising blood glucose stimulates the pancreas to release the hormone insulin, which signals the cells to absorb glucose for energy or storage. If we have too much excess glucose, that is metabolized in the liver to create fatty acids, triglycerides, and cholesterol. So if we have a liver problem, if we have an inflamed liver, this could be affected, and we could start seeing differences here. We could start seeing a rise in a fatty liver, a rise in triglycerides in our lab work, and a rise in cholesterol. If our liver isn't metabolizing properly, we have a problem, right? If the blood glucose level falls, what happens then? Well, the pancreas releases another hormone, glucagon. Also from the adrenals, they release cortisol, tell the liver to release stored glucose. So we have glucose stored in the liver, and that can't be too much. That also needs to be regulated and in balance. Otherwise, we get what is known as fatty liver. So carbohydrates and cancer. I'm sure most of you have heard of the Warburg effect, that cancer cells adapt metabolically to survive and grow, right? Tumor cells can move from aerobic cellular respiration to anaerobic glycolysis, lots of big words, okay? But what that basically means, and this was all back way in 1924, this was already established, that tumor cells become major glucose consumers, okay? So tumor cells can consume glucose, okay? Byproduct is lactic acid. What does that do? It acidifies the tumor microenvironment, which then the tumor takes advantage of and can spread and grow and attract blood vessels to itself. Okay, so the Warburg effect we know from way back when, and let's refine that a little bit to understand what it actually means in terms of now insulin and the other factors that I referred to in the beginning when I was looking at the research, and I said I'm going to come back to it. This is the moment, okay? So insulin, secreted by the pancreas in response to blood levels of glucose, okay? We have lots of glucose in the blood. The insulin goes, okay, the pancreas goes, I'm going to release insulin to get rid of the glucose from the blood, okay? This insulin influences hormone and cell signaling in cells, including tumor cells, okay? Cancer cells can have an overexpression of insulin receptors, meaning they can have more insulin receptors on their cell membranes than normal cells. That can promote cancer cell growth because it attracts more glucose to it, right? So chronic elevated glucose and insulin and inflammatory cytokines, those are inflammation markers, may contribute to cancer growth because of these hyperactive insulin receptors on tumor cells. So if we are eating in a way where we constantly have elevated glucose levels, we eat in a way where the glucose we eat rises quickly from simple refined carbs and lots of sugary foods or beverages, meaning we constantly have these blood sugar spikes, constantly chronically elevated glucose, that's bad news. That's what we want to try and avoid. And that's where the whole debate on sugar feeds cancer comes in, okay? So we want that mechanism to be better regulated, okay? So elevated levels of glucose and insulin in the microenvironment favor cell survival in DNA damaged cells. We can say that now. Fiber, carbohydrates and fiber. I alluded to it early on, but it's very, very important here in our cancer care too. So this is non-digestible plant materials that pass through the GI tract, help us poop better, in other words, right? Support growth of healthy bacteria. It feeds, it's prebiotic. It feeds our good bacteria. And it increases the speed at which the poop passes through. Because if we have sluggish digestion, we are more exposed to carcinogens and toxins, right? So we want to have very regular bowel movements. We want to go at least once, twice a day, have good bowel movements, and fiber helps us achieve that as well. And also, fiber produces short-chain fatty acids in the colon. That's a good thing. It quelches oxidative stress and inflammation. So when we do a stool test, we test for short-chain fatty acids. When we look at your poop, we want that to be high. It really is critical in maintaining colon health and in regulating cell growth and differentiation. So the big question is, how many carbohydrates do I eat a day? Do I need a day? Okay. So we do focus on a low to moderate carbohydrate intake. And again, I said ketogenic, this is not ketogenic, right? Ketogenic diet is a very, very specific therapeutic diet. This is not it. This is just moderate carbohydrate intake, about 100 grams a day or less of net carbs. That is your total carbohydrates minus the fiber. So we always look at that, right? If you look at any nutrition facts label, you look at the total carbohydrate line and underneath it, the fiber, and you subtract that. That's the amount of carbohydrates, net carbs, you're actually consuming with that particular portion size. And we focus on the complex carbs, whole grains, legumes and beans, vegetables that do not spike glucose and insulin in the blood. There's a whole list of those veggies as well. So high sugary fruits, for example, we are mindful how we eat those. We eat those with protein. In fact, we don't eat those on their own, because even though it's a whole food of fruit, but they can also rise and spike your glucose levels at the same time. We want to support beneficial gut microbiomes. We need a healthy gut, right? And we want to increase those short-chain fatty acids in the gut as well. So we can now officially say that carbohydrate restriction, and they include the ketogenic diet here, are capable of creating an unfavorable environment for cancer growth. Okay, both of those do similar things. Proteins. Proteins are the main constituent of human tissue. So when we need cell repair from damaged cells, from damaged like chemotherapy that kills so many of our healthy cells as well, we need a lot of proteins. And there are different types of amino acids that make up our proteins. They regulate all kinds of things in the body as well. Our neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, the feel good and feel happy hormones. Other hormones, insulin and IGF-1/2, are regulated by proteins. The fluid balance and blood vessels, albumin, are regulated by proteins, and also they constitute all our antibodies that protect us. So protein is crucial, and when we are in treatment, even more so. Now, you may ask, if proteins form the foundation of tissue, will they actually feed tumors, right? So that's sometimes a question that I get. And I can't give you a scientific answer to that yet, because that really hasn't been studied like that. But we do know that some amino acids in some tumors, if the tumor profiles are tested, can indicate that we need to stay away from certain amino acids. That's very detailed genetic profile testing, but we do have some information on that for certain cancers. So that becomes incredibly specific to a particular cancer type. Now, here's this IGF-1 that have been referring to a lot, many times, insulin-like growth factor 1. It's a hormone, and it's a very important regulator of metabolism and growth, including tumor growth. So it can make tumors grow. It's made in the liver, and it responds to a concentration of amino acids in the blood and liver. Okay, so excessive amounts can promote tumor growth. We don't want IGF-1 to be too high. We can test for that with just normal lab markers. And a high protein intake can increase IGF in blood, but mainly animal protein. All right, that seems to be a direct relationship to the more animal protein we consume, the more it could rise. It doesn't have to, it could. Okay, so we want to have normal to lower IGF-1 levels in our blood. Insulin plays a role with proteins too, not just carbohydrates. So the levels in the blood are regulated by protein intake and also amino acids, right? So they promote energy storage, it activates forming of muscle proteins. So insulin, the reason I put this in here, it gets a bad rap. because it is a growth promoter. But we actually need insulin too. Okay, and that's the beauty of the body. It's complex. It's never just black or white, right? High levels can stimulate cell growth, but only if the insulin is in excess, okay, as we see with type 2 diabetes and obesity. And of course, I mentioned this before, that cancer cells can have an overexpression of insulin receptors. That's why we want to keep the glucose in a very normal range in the body. And animal protein has the greatest potential to secrete insulin. Plant protein can actually reduce insulin resistance and lower blood insulin. Okay, so this is a shout out for plant protein. Then we have this thing, mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is increasingly becoming highlighted. So this is a particular protein that can pick up environmental signals, including nutrient concentration. Now, mTOR signaling regulates cell growth and survival. Very important marker in cancer growth. It can prevent autophagy, which is when damaged cells kind of dissolve and eat themselves, a natural process. Okay, so if it stops that, it means that damaged cells, aka cancer cells, can survive. And we have seen that in a lot of cancers, this mTOR signaling is not normal anymore and is overactive. It is activated by insulin growth factor hormone and also insulin itself and some amino acids, in particular leucine and arginine, which is found mainly in animal protein. So a higher protein intake, especially animal-based, can promote mTOR. So this is where how much protein am I supposed to eat? And do I have to only eat plant protein? And the question is no, 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 right? So it doesn't mean to say we only eat plant protein. We can absolutely consume animal protein if we are not sensitive or allergic to it. But we just need to be understanding of how much we're supposed to be eating. And I'm going to tell you this. So what the general oncology nutrition research says is this, that people between 18 and 65 with low physical activity to reduce their risk of cancer, okay, they say optimal protein intake is this, 0.8 gram per kilograms per day. They give it like that, all right? I know this is not what we are used to. So if we convert that, let's say somebody weighs 150 pounds, that means I weigh 68 kilograms. So that means if I'm a low activity person, I should consume 54 grams of protein per day. If I am a person that has higher physical activity or established disease, in other words, I have been diagnosed with cancer, I'm in the middle of cancer treatment, because we want to maintain muscle mass, right? We need a higher protein intake, and that would be for somebody weighing 150 pounds, that would be about 102 grams of protein a day. So it depends on your weight and it depends on your needs. If you are going through chemotherapy, surgery, or if you have an active infection, or if you're old and your physical state shows that you're already losing muscle mass, we need to really personalize that and make sure that you don't lose more muscle mass. Okay, so this is a very personal, this is generic what I'm showing you here, but I always really make that very personal with every single one of my clients. Fats and fatty acids. Here, again, we generally know, well, first of all, fats are very important for the composition of our cell membranes, which is directly influenced by what types of fats we eat. And some fats are even made within the body. So saturated fatty acids, we know them because they're solid at room temperature, are a lot in plant-based products, processed foods to sugary foods to, we have some plant-based ones, palm oil and coconut oil too. Now, in excess, too much can promote inflation, right? Inflammation, obesity, insulin resistance, cancer too. They are linked in tumor cell membranes to more aggressive cancers in excess, right? But what saturated fatty acids can also do is they can reduce the fluidity and motility, meaning that there is a less chance of invasion and metastases. So they have that too. They make the cell membranes more rigid. Okay, so that can actually work in our favor. Monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are the good ones. Those are mainly from plant sources. We need them all, okay? Olive oil, the oleic acid in olive oil has high levels of polyphenols. Those are good plant compounds that protect our cells, highly protective against cancer. And then the polys are, which is where the omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids come in that we hear so much about, right? So omega-6 in excess don't have to, but can promote inflammation, whereas the omega-3s are protective. We need both, though. We need omega-6 fatty acids. We just need to have them in a better ratio. Our modern way of living, the standard American diet called SAD, is just high in omega-6 fatty acids compared to omega-3. And we just need to balance that ratio out, aim for like about 3 times omega-6 to 1 times omega-3 fatty acids. Okay. So that was just a quick overview of the fats, right? What fats should we be focusing on? Before I go into the fast food tips, and I know we want to have some time for questions too, but this is the next slides are tips for you, right? So in terms of eating, just to wrap it up, I hope you got the information of how the foods that we eat can control our inner environment, and we can absolutely eat animal based foods if we want to. We can eat plant-based foods if we want to. We just need to make sure that we get enough protein into it, which we can. We just need to be very mindful. So in other words, it translates into it's a lot more work. We need to be a lot more focused. And also we need to be a lot more focused that we don't consume foods that are simple calories, refined calories. Okay, so that's very often the problem with vegans and vegetarianism. So it's hard work to eat in a nutrient-rich way, but it can be done, all right? What I'm focusing on with these next slides these are fun slides, right? Because we need fast food options, okay? And these are the types of fast food options that I employ in my own life and that I also guide my clients on. So in terms of vegetables, one of the questions at CPAT I had from someone was, I know I need to eat my vegetables, but, okay, so here we go. Frozen vegetables and fruits, I have them in my freezer. They're just handy. You can buy little broccoli florets. You can buy little cauliflower florets already there. So minimal preparation is required on your part, and they still maintain most of their nutrient profile. Then bulk roast vegetable trays, I do that all the time. So it's a one-stop effort, and then you can have 2 or 3 days worth of veggies to eat from. You pre-chop raw veggies at home for the week, spend a little bit of time, half an hour or so on a Sunday doing that, and you can make things easier during the week. There are pre-chopped raw veggies in the stores, as you can see. Cubed butternut squash for me is huge because it just takes some hefty muscle work to chop up a butternut, but this is great. Fresh guacamole, for example, instead of you having to make your own. So there are options. I found this ginger, lime, turmeric cubes as well the other day. So that's great to throw into your smoothie. So little things like that can add nutrient profile to your eating, but reducing prep work. When it comes to protein, here too, we can have, frozen meatballs we can buy, then frozen single fish portions we can buy, canned salmon, sardines, mackerel, tuna in your pantry, sliced chicken, turkey, quick, easy protein to put into a salad. There are low carb protein bars. My 2 favorite ones are David and Perfect Keto. I don't have any affiliations with anybody. I'm just giving you out. These are my private personal tips that are working. Turkey or grass-fed beef jerky sticks, where we just look for good quality ones again too. Then plant-based cream cheese spreads with nut flour crackers like Simple Mills. These are all things you can have at home, okay, that make, if you're hungry, if you're making dinner and you want to put something in your mouth real quick, these are some of the go-to options too. Protein powders, yes. I'm not going into which type because that is like a half an hour discussion in itself, but they are definitely an option to increase your protein intake. Hummus, ready-made hummus, so many choices out there now, right? Hard-boiled eggs too, and then bone broth. This particular company, Brodo, is absolutely delicious. If you want to, look into them, they really have some good, and they are little sachets like that, so they store well in your pantry. Healthy fats, olives, avocados, raw nuts and seeds, nut and seed butters, coconut butter, manna on the bottom right there, delicious, right? Fat bombs, I found this particular one recently. They are yummy in between. This is, again, if you can tolerate high fat, please note, okay, if you can tolerate high fat. Crumbled goat's cheese, really crumbled to throw into salads, feta cheese cubes. Again, those are just easy options to make life a bit easier for you when you have to throw dinner together very fast. Another tip for you, if organic is a bit tough because of financial restraints, the environmental working groups Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen gives you an indication of which one should you definitely focus on buying, because they have the highest pesticide residue versus those that are cleaner. So very good tip. The Ingredient Guru is a fantastic site to help educate you on healthy and harmful ingredients. I think that's like base knowledge that we all should have. And then to round off, we're all unique, right? So every person needs to be looked at separately. So we look at the microenvironment, underlying health conditions. We look at your digestive health. What toxic burden are you already experiencing? What reactivities, sensitivities do you have? What personal preferences? What is important to you? Those are the things I look at when I look at you. Okay, and before I can answer any personalized questions, I need to look at those things and be mindful of what applies to you. You can monitor your microenvironment. Again, some tips here. There are some macro tracking apps, fantastic, that help you track your macronutrients. Lab markers that we look at to give us information on the things I discussed are all there as well. This is something that is part of my post-cancer care that I do for myself as well on a regular basis to understand what's going on inside of me. Yeah, I've come to the end. So thank you very much for your attention. Just briefly, I've written a book that is available on Amazon. My website is down there. There's a contact page too, where you can reach me if you have a question that is related to this. I cannot answer personalized questions because I would need to evaluate you. So when I take on a client, for example, there's a very long health intake form because I need to know a lot about you before I can answer any personalized questions. But general questions I can absolutely answer anytime. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was incredibly informative. We have a ton of questions and not very much time for them. So I'm just going to throw out, there's two kind of big overarching questions. There's a lot of more specific ones, and you've agreed to help us maybe address some of the questions that we can't get to, so we can post that when we post the recording. But one kind of big question is, how can a cancer patient work with their healthcare team to develop and implement a personal plan? And can you talk about the difference between nutritionist and dietitian in terms of helping with that plan?
Sure. So it really depends on you, how many people you want to have on your team. I think the most important thing is how you show up. You have to have the attitude of I'm the captain of my ship, and I'm employing all of you to help me, rather than I'm just the passive recipient of what's going on and I have no control. So I really encourage you to be proactive there. The difference between, a registered dietitian is someone who is licensed, who's gone through the licensing requirements, that board exam. I'm a board certified holistic nutritionist. I have gone through my own board exam, which is just as strenuous. We've compared it. That's how I know. So a licensed registered dietitian can work in hospital settings, and you can claim from health insurance. A board certified holistic nutritionist like myself, we cannot claim from health insurance. So when you work with us, it's out of pocket.
Great, thank you. And I know we're at the 1 o'clock Eastern, but I want to ask one more question. So there's so much information out there on social media. I really appreciate that you presented research-backed data and showed the citations. But how, if you're just scrolling social media and you're seeing all this stuff, how do you know what's good information and how do you weed out the bad information?
That's such an excellent question. So thank you for asking that. So yes, we have lots of influencers out there and lots of things coming up on Facebook and Insta and so on, and it can be incredibly confusing. So here's a little formula that you can definitely apply. What are they selling? Right? Are they selling something that is related to a product? If you click on their information and it takes you through pages and pages and pages and pages before they get to it, and I'll get to this, I'll get to that, and they won't, and they don't, and they don't, and you sit there for 15 minutes, they're selling something, they have vested interests in it. Then if they're quoting research, how transparent are they about the sources and the pros and the cons? How big was the sample size? They generally leave that out. So sometimes research gets quoted and you would look it up if you actually have the information to look it up, and someone who's authentic would share that information. It's a study from bloody blah, bloody blah, bloody blah, which you could look into and read up yourself. Sometimes those studies are if they exist at all, they might be very, very small groups, and the study itself has a lot of criticism. So it's always important to understand if someone throws a research language around, is that authentic research, yes or not? Was it peer reviewed, right? Is it published? But the biggest thing is the language too. What language are they using? Are they using fear-driven language? If you don't do this, this will happen to you. This will definitely happen to you, right? You can never, ever say that. We are unique people. We don't know if we do X that will happen to us. Maybe it'll happen to you or the other person, but maybe not to me. You can never make that claim. And you can also never make a claim that whatever it is that I'm telling you to do will make you better, will heal you, will make that go away. You cannot use this absolute language. That is another red flag for me. And I know there are lots of questions. I'm happy to answer them all. So just forward them to me because I know I talked a little bit longer than we had agreed and I get
Such
carried away,
incredible
but I will
information.
happily answer all the questions.
Yeah, I think we can group them. I think there's probably some overlap and some general themes, and maybe we can do like an FAQ that we can post with it. So
Yeah,
thank you very much for an incredibly informative presentation. There was so much good information there. And we really appreciate everybody joining us today. And again, thanks to the Cancer Nation team. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you.